Hey, this is Thaddeus from Sprout City Studios again with some notes on bass tones. Let's talk about microphones and placement and options and DIs and all that fun stuff. So what we have here set up is an Ampeg. This is a 610 cabinet, 6 10-inch drivers with an Ampeg SVT 4 Pro head. I don't see very much of these anymore, but for a long time they were great to cover a lot of different tone ranges. I still think of them as kind of a Swiss Army knife of bass amps. You can get lots of different tones out of it. But as far as what most people are concerned about when you're recording bass amps at home, or if you want to go into a studio and get the best response out of it, is working with the amp in the space and also the type of microphones that you're using on the amp cabinet. So first, let's talk about the signal chain that we have here. We have the bass going into this DI box. We have this as the last thing in the signal chain, usually after the last pedal if the bassist is using a pedal board, and then out of this going into the head. This is coming out at a mic level so that we can run into a mic preamp and boost it up along with our mics. This microphone right here is a large diaphragm dynamic mic made by Heil. It's the PR40 series. It's fantastic for a lot of different purposes: kick drums, vocals, you name it. It'll do a lot. This is a large diaphragm condenser by AKG called the 414, and these two mics sound very different from each other. This one's a lot warmer and rounder. This one's a lot more tack sharp and clean. So as we listen to these, you'll probably hear the tonal difference. But the thing that's really important if you're going to use multiple mics and a DI on a bass is that you need to spend some time aligning all of those signals in phase. Otherwise, they're going to cause cancellations for you, and you're going to lose some important part of your bass tone. So let's talk about that. Okay, here we are. So now this is looking at the files that we just recorded. I've got the PR40, the 414, and the DI right up here. And just to show what's going on with the phase interaction between all these, we just eyeballed where we placed the mics, but you can see that the front of the pick hitting the string is giving us a really nice sharp attack, and the DI is way ahead of time of the PR40 or the 414, and this kind of out of time phase interaction is going to create problems no matter what you're trying to do. So whenever you're recording anything with multiple mics, you want to try to get these things in phase as much as possible. So let's just hear each mic by itself to start and just get a feeling for what is going on here. So here's the PR40 by itself. Okay, here's the 414. Here's the DI. Okay. So now that you've heard all the individual sounds, let's hear what they sound like together. So we're going to start with just the PR40 and add these other mics and DI in. Just the PR40. Adding in the 414. And now adding the DI. And because I particularly like the tone of the 414, I'm going to focus on the 414 for now. And if you notice, with the 414, if I introduce just the DI, leaving out the PR40 in this case, you'll hear a drastic shift. Becomes a lot brighter and a little bit more tacky. So there are several different ways that you can address this problem. One is you can literally go in and you can move the waveform around, and this is dangerous. I don't recommend this unless you've done it a lot. But you can go in and you can literally grab where you see the wave starting, and sometimes it's helpful to zoom in a little bit if you need to on the wave so that you can see where the first real motion is. And you can drag it over in time to try to line up the phase interaction between the two. So if you want to do that, here's what this would sound like. Here's just the 414, just the DI, and now together. So they interact a little bit nicer. But again, like I said, this is dangerous. So let's try a different way. I'm going to undo that real quick just so we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. And now I'm going to show you on a meter what's actually happening when you have negative phase interaction between two things. So the two that were interacting the worst, in my opinion, were the PR40 and the DI. And you can sort of see that while one is going positive, the other one's going negative for the same pluck. So this is going to directly cause a lot of phase cancellation, but at different frequencies, depending on what frequencies are involved. And in a bass, there is a lot of frequencies involved, which you can see if you look at this FFT graph here. Here's just the PR40, just the DI, and then listen to what happens when I mix them together. All of a sudden we've got a huge low frequency buildup and a bunch of mid-range that just kind of disappears. So here's without the DI again. See how it seems warm, and now it just sounds kind of tinny and weird. So a way that anybody can check phase, if you're not aware of what you're hearing, is to use a goniometer, and that's a weird word, but it's very useful in mixing. So if we hard pan the PR40 and the DI left and right, like this, now what it's going to show us is one of them is coming out entirely on the left and one of them is combining on the right, and together, where they're mixed in the middle, it's going to have some sort of phase interaction. And that's shown here mostly on the correlation meter. If you have a correlation meter, you want to always be on the plus side of the correlation. So it's showing you if you have if you go below that midline, anything that's mixing out of phase is going to show up here. So let's check this out. See, lots of weird bad phase depending on which note is played. And just to show you, when you move things back into phase, let's see if I can recreate that weird little move that I did. No, it's not going to let me, but oh, it did. Great. So now if we were to bump these over so that they're slightly more in time with each other, which I think is going to be more like this, something like that. And you can see that this one's going up while this one's going down, so they're definitely interacting out of phase. That problem is probably even going to be worse now. It's about the same, but yeah, that's pretty bad. So now a simple thing you could do is just go here on the DI channel and pull up some plugin. It doesn't matter which DAW you're using. Some plugin is going to allow you to phase invert the signal. So what I'm going to do is phase invert just the DI track. So let's press that. Now watch what happens on the goniometer. Lots more positive, but still some negative. And here's without it again. Some weird stuff happening. So there's always going to be phase issues whenever you're combining a DI and a mic. So it's just something to be aware of. Okay, so now I've spent some time setting up some things that I might do if I was trying to fit this bass into a mix. Let's say it was a rock band. I pulled up an EQ for each channel on the PR40, the 414, and then I also put a compressor afterwards. This EQ is the Pro Q3 by FabFilter. I think it's a fantastic EQ. It can do many, many things. Go look it up. And then also the UBK1 by Cush Audio is one of the easiest to use, quickest, nicest sounding, good, gritty bass compressor units I've ever found. So just to simplify, I just made this happen really fast so you guys wouldn't have to parse all this data too hard. So let's listen to each one by itself real quick. So here's the PR40 through this signal chain. I haven't done any EQ yet because I just wanted to show you where the resonant bumps were in this particular mic setup. So in the PR40, you can see that there's a whole lot of sub-low energy here. There's a lot of super lows. You can see on the output meter that it's showing a huge amount of buildup down here below 60 hertz, somewhere right around 50 something hertz. And And then on the 414, if we jump to that mic, the signal is a little bit warmer. It's got this fuzzy mid-range thing going on that I really do like a lot, but it doesn't have so much sub-lows. And then I've run the DI through a really remarkable piece of software by Softtube that lets you custom build different kinds of amps in a room and move microphones around and whatnot. And in this case, I'm using this 410 cabinet, or I guess maybe it's a 412, I'm not sure. But I was trying to make a fake Ampeg to compare. So here's the DI without this plugin. And here's with it. Pretty awesome. Now here's the real Ampeg through a 414. DI. Yeah, I was trying my best to get it to sound like a real mic on a real cabinet. But anyway, so just to show you some options, that's something that you can play around with if you'd like. So now what I have is 3 distinct qualities. So let me play each by themselves and then all 3 together. Let's start with the PR40. 414. And then the DI through that amp simulator. Now let's add the PR40 and the 414 together. Let me take away the 414 just so you can hear just the PR40 by itself. Together. And now with the DI fake cabinet, if you really want to get crazy. But one of the things you need to be aware of if you're combining signals in phase, and I've gone through and I've done some careful phase alignment to all 3 of these, when you start mixing them together, you'll notice that on average, you're going to gain somewhere close to 6 decibels on your output from each section. So just the PR40 by itself, peaking out around -8 or so. And then let's add the 414 in. Now it's peaking out at just above 4, so I've gained 4 dB just from adding those 2 together. Now if I add the DI in and it's in phase, I'm going to almost be clipping. So just so you know, when you do correctly phase align things and you mix them together, you're going to get a lot of summation addition to your volume. So it's something to be careful when you're mixing multiple mics or a mic and a DI that you have properly phase aligned. So there's so many different approaches to how to mix a bass into a song. I don't even want to scratch the surface because there's so much to that without having a drum track and vocals and guitars and things like that and synthesizers and whatnot that are going to compete with it. I can't really show you the kinds of things that I would try to do for a mix. But I can show you that, in my opinion, this PR40, while it sounds great and it's got a nice clean bite to it, it feels a little brittle. And the 414 by itself, even though it sounds warm and fuzzy and nice, it doesn't have a whole lot of attack. So I actually like the combination of these 2 together a lot, because now I get the best of both worlds, the warm and fuzzy and the deep low and the bite of the attack, the pick hitting the string. Or it might be nice to take the 414 and mix it with that simulated cabinet, because that seems a little softer to me. So depending on the song and what else was going on, I might try just the combination of that before I even got into EQ. But one thing that you could definitely try is pulling out some sub-lows on a bass is not necessarily a bad idea, because you can end up fighting with kick drum frequencies down here around 40 or so hertz, where there's all this buildup on certain notes. Listen to this for a second. Let me turn this off. See, that one note is jumping up a lot. I can use EQ to kind of balance out that one note so it's less intense on our output. So here's the levels of what's going on the output. So now it's less intense. Here's without it. See, that note is just creeping up. So that's one way you can deal with certain frequencies that are just jumping out. And that's a good idea no matter what kind of music you're working in. If there's one bass note that's freaking out above the rest, you might want to go in and notch that down a little bit. But sometimes you can end up paying for that when you're combining two things, because by changing EQ, you're actually changing a phase relationship, because EQ is actually phase. They interact on the time domain as well as the frequency domain, and that in itself is a huge other subject. But just don't worry about it. Just do what feels right. But you can end up, if you create a phase problem, because if you mix two mics together and it's sounding good, and then you start EQing one mic and all of a sudden there's one note that just disappears every time it's played, chances are you've created a phase hole right at that frequency, whatever that bass note is. So just to show you a little bit about what I did with the compressors on these things, I put the EQ before the compressor. There's no rhyme or reason to why I did that. I just put them in this order just for this video. You guys might want to swap EQ after compression. There's a whole lot of good reasons to do that. Depends on how you want the compressor to react. In this case, I'm putting it before the compressor because that one low frequency on that one note that's coming up and hitting it could actually trigger the compressor earlier than I'd like it to. But in this case, I also have a low roll-off in the compressor, so I'm not that worried about it. But just to show you, I've got it on a crush mode, and I'm mixing in a little bit of the dry signal, and I'm also adding a little bit of saturation overall. So just to show you what this sounds like without it, here is just the EQ by itself. Here's the EQ off. Now here is the compressor. So I'm doing a little bit of compression and a little bit of volume adding on the output. I'm making up a little bit of the lost gain reduction here. And then I'm also doing the same sort of thing on the 414. Here's that by itself. This one doesn't have any notes that are particularly louder than the others. If you look at as this person is walking up and down the bass, you can see that the notes aren't drastically changing in volume overall. So what I'm going to decide to do here is probably utilize the DI and the 414 together, just because I feel like those two are really speaking to me. You guys might have a completely different opinion, and that's fine. You might like the bite of the PR40. Depending on the type of music you're mixing for, I might pick one over the other. But just right now, sitting here listening to a bass by itself, I kind of like this sound. And in this case, I feel like when I add those two things together, there's a little bit of a buildup in the mid-range here that I don't like. And here's one of the coolest things about the FabFilter Pro Q series, is that you can actually listen to the frequencies that are being EQ'd. Sounds like it's somewhere right around here, just under and above 200 hertz is building up too much when I combine the 414 with the DI signal. Here's without that. See what I mean? Just feels a little pushy. So I'm just taking that down a touch. Like, it's only 3 dB, it's not a huge amount. 3.5 dB. But anyway, there are just so many different approaches to how you'd want to balance bass in a mix. This is me just balancing the bass to itself, really. So the things that I always check when I'm listening to a bass, whether I have one mic, two mics and a DI, or whatever I have in front of me, is I always just listen and try to hear if there's any notes that are really sticking out too far, or if there's any notes that are just disappearing. That means you either have a phase problem, or the bass itself was anemic, it didn't have enough of that frequency, or it had too much of a certain frequency. And every single bass guitar ever built has problems at some frequency, pretty much. So if we just listen back with these two mixed together, you can see that as it's walking up and down, the overall level on the meter is staying pretty close to the same for every note. And this is a pretty nice sounding bass. I like it a lot. Now, just to go over it one more time, Here's the PR40 by itself. Still pretty heavy on the lows and kind of bitey up here. You see how there's something up around 2K that's a little bit pushy. Here's the 414. Still got some bite, but nowhere near as harsh and tacky. And then here's the DI through my fake amplifier again. Just to show you again what the DI sounds like native. That's without this amp. On again. So let's see one more time. PR40 mixed with the 414. That's nice, but it's a bit pushy and tacky up top. And here's the 414 by itself, and with the DI sim. Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that would fit in really well with a lot of different kinds of music. So no matter what you choose, you're going to make some mistake. Just know that somebody in the band is not going to like the choice that you make, and you're going to have to adjust. But if you've got every bass note well represented, that's a good start to anything. Hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope this helps you. Let me know if you have other questions.